Walton. She is professor of history at Purdue University. She has published 3 books since receiving her PhD from the University of Wisconsin at Madison: Internationalism, National Identities and Study Abroad; Eve's Proud Descendants, 4 Women Writers and Republican Politics in 19th Century France; France at the Crystal Palace, Bourgeois Taste and Artisan Manufacture in the 19th Century. She has also contributed chapters to several edited volumes. Today her topic is In the Field with Charles-Alexandre Lesueur, Science and Community on 3 Continents.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. Scholarship on French naturalist and artist Charles-Alexandre Lesueur, pictured here, has often addressed either his work on the Baudin expedition to Australia from 1801 to 1804, or the time he spent in North America from 1816 to 1837. This separation also reflects different trends in historiography, notably a focus on the involvement of science in 18th century European imperialism, and another focus on mutually reinforcing developments of science and the nation state in the 19th century. This paper seeks to unite these 2 important parts of Lesueur's scientific career through the common experience of fieldwork, and it includes briefly another scientific expedition he made to the French Riviera in 1809. Drawing from Hannah Hodach's analysis of the transformative functions of fieldwork, it examines the ways that Lesueur learned scientific practice through fieldwork and the challenges he faced to continue doing fieldwork. It also considers linkages between ethnography and scientific communities and the ways that fieldwork fostered and disrupted different kinds of community. I argue that fieldwork launched and drove Lesueur's professional career, and it hindered him from greater achievement and recognition in his lifetime and in history. I also suggest that his experiences of community among scientists and in the field rendered him skeptical of the radical and reformist ideals behind the experimental settlement of New Harmony, Indiana, where he lived from 1826 to 1837. Lesueur seemed to be seeking employment in turbulent times. Sorry. Wait, I'm sorry. Why? Sorry. There we go. All right. Lesueur seemed to be seeking employment in turbulent times when he enlisted as a gunner on the Géographe in 1801. He explained to his father, a judicial secretary in the Admiralty, why he wanted to join the expedition to Australia. Quote, "I am leaving for my own satisfaction and to seek greater peace beneath other skies and to find means of working if the opportunity arises and my star is sufficiently fortunate. You know that in these times it is impossible to do anything at all, that life is a burden when one has no occupation." Unquote. Moreover, it was clear that Captain Nicolas Baudin anticipated that Lesueur would spend most of his time doing artwork, specifically illustrating the journal Baudin would keep of the voyage rather than gunnery. And indeed, after the appointed artists left the ship in Ile-de-France, Lesueur, along with Nicolas Martin-Petit, assumed their positions. Lesueur practiced his art and learned science on the expedition, particularly in collaboration with the young zoologist François Perron, who became a close friend. His friendship with Perron was significant in many ways. Botanist Antoine Laurent de Jussieu described the two as, quote, "inseparable friends who helped each other," unquote, and who contributed significantly to the success of the expedition through their collecting and observations. Jussieu suggested that Perron, who had studied science, more than rose to the occasion of becoming the sole zoologist on the expedition despite his relative youth, and he both guided Lesueur and benefited from Lesueur's assistance and companionship. It's really amazing. I mean, these young guys had these big positions because all these other guys bailed out. Perron, this is Jussieu describing the two. Perron, the only remaining zoologist on the expedition, did not limit himself to physical and anatomical observations to which he was initially assigned, but he zealously embraced other parts of zoology. Lesueur, charged only with drawing animals, added for himself the function of collector. Perron recognized that he owed much to this faithful companion who, whether tramping at his side or staying on the ship, prepared and drew the objects his friend collected, lightening his workload and allowing him to pursue new research. During the voyage, Perron and Lesueur engaged in a wide range of scientific practices, recording weather conditions, measuring sea temperatures, interacting with indigenous peoples and analyzing their behaviors, and collecting and preserving animal specimens. But marine animals seem to hold a special fascination for the two naturalists, as Perron's essay on the new genus Pyrosoma suggests. According to Perron, naturalists and travelers had neglected to study these pelagic tunicates for many reasons. They are weird and off-putting, hard to describe, draw, and preserve. They feel disgusting. They smell bad. They decompose rapidly. They are difficult to study. I mean, they're kind of like jellyfish, but small. Additionally, few anticipated how valuable these creatures would be for natural history. But thanks to Georges Cuvier, who taught Perron and provided him with notes, and to nearly 4 years of travel in the Atlantic and Indian Ocean and around Australia, Perron and Lesueur, hanging over the side of their ship to trap the animals in nets, completed the most extensive research to date on these luminescent sea creatures. Perron wrote, "My friend Lesueur, whom the most distinguished naturalists and artists admire for both his drawing and painting, was ever my collaborator and companion. Whatever I described carefully and in detail, he drew or painted with perfect accuracy." You can see this here. "All our work, all our observations we made on live animals in the presence of the staff of our ship." The voyage transformed Lesueur into a naturalist and perhaps established his abiding interest in fish and marine life. He also learned about community on board the Géographe. The men were all engaged in the shared mission of scientific exploration, mapping, observing, collecting, preserving, recording, as Carol Harrison, our commentator, asserts about these citizen scientists. They also depended on one another for survival at sea and on land. Perron wrote at length about the ravages of dysentery and scurvy upon the entire crew and the devotion of those who were well enough to help care for the sick. From May to June 1802, scurvy afflicted crew members and animals, and now I'm going to quote from Perron. "No one among us was exempt. It hit even domestic animals, including 2 rabbits and a monkey belonging to Sailor Lefebvre that died from the scurvy." Amidst these disasters, our second doctor, Monsieur Taillefer, honored himself with the most generous devotion. He alone was in a condition to care effectively for the sick. Day and night, he stayed awake to attend them, to alleviate their pain and lance their putrid ulcers. He served them all as nurse, doctor, consular, and friend combined. They had a lot more disasters, but I'm moving on. After a harrowing adventure on land in 1803, when Perron and his companion got lost, tramped without food or water, and finally collapsed from heat, dehydration, and exhaustion, they reached the rest of their landing party, and now Perron writes, "Our good comrades hastened to us. They helped us up, supported us, and they reignited the flame of life that was almost extinguished. Their eagerness to help was all the greater because they had lost all hope of seeing us again." So Perron asserts that his friend Monsieur de Montbazin had even disobeyed the captain's orders to return to the ship in order to save the men. Lesueur learned about community in another sense, through interactions with indigenous peoples and Perron's ethnographic interpretations of them. Carol Harrison, again, and others have analyzed the shifting frames of these European and indigenous encounters. Whatever the merits and deficiencies of Perron's ethnography, and you can read Carol's article on this, Lesueur took away the practice of observing and interpreting human social interactions that he continued in his subsequent fieldwork, even when his professional focus was geology or zoology. An example among many was the crocodile hunt on the island of Timor in 1803 that involved negotiation with indigenous beliefs and a brief consideration of slavery. According to Perron's published account, the slaves on Timor were happy to serve their masters because the masters were not arbitrary and working conditions were reasonable, in contrast to the situation in America, and I'll return to this later. More challenging to Perron and Lesueur in terms of the mission to secure a crocodile specimen for the collection was the spiritual belief system of the indigenous community. The Malays who guided and assisted them in the crocodile hunt did not believe in using saddles for riding horses, and they regarded crocodiles as sacred and killing a crocodile as sacrilege, if not impossible. Perron and Lesueur rode bareback, and they devised different methods of overcoming indigenous reluctance to participate in the hunt. Once Lesueur had shot the crocodile, and he and Perron dissected it, with great difficulty performing the dissection while standing waist deep in water. The only way to get the Malays to help them transport the remains was to construct a sling out of bamboo limbs, which the Malays were willing to shoulder since they could avoid contact with the crocodile. Now, the crocodile hunt is a great story, but I'm going to move on about it. The upshot of this story is an appreciation for and skepticism about human community that Lesueur applied to his fellow naturalists, local residents, and to idealists, as we will see below. After the Géographe returned to France in 1804, Perron and Lesueur worked together in Paris on writing the official account of the voyage, and then in 1809, they traveled to the south of France as treatment for Perron's tuberculosis. Applying some of the techniques developed on the Baudin expedition, the two continued their work on marine life in Nice and other Mediterranean coastal areas whenever Perron was able and the unusually harsh weather of 1809 permitted. They also met and collaborated. Here they are fishing in the Bay of Nice. They also collaborated with a local pharmacist and naturalist, Antoine Risso, who apparently introduced them to a simple and effective method of collecting new specimens, inspecting the baskets of fishermen, a practice that Lesueur continued for the rest of his life. According to Lesueur, their work in the Mediterranean reminded the naturalists of their experiences in Timor and brought wonder and happiness to the ailing Perron. I cannot convey the quantity of mollusks and the pleasure we experience studying the many evolutions of each of them relative to their particular habits. There was nothing so interesting, so we extended our stay on the sea as long as my friend was not too tired. For him, this was the sweetest and most agreeable pleasure. Well, Perron's health deteriorated, and the two made their way to Perron's birthplace, where he died in 1810, still working on his account of the Baudin expedition. Although he entrusted his papers to Lesueur, another member of the expedition, Louis de Freycinet, completed the work. Finding the means to do field work was a lifelong concern for Lesueur, and the relationship between fieldwork and community was often fraught. Back in Paris after 1810, he worked for the Museum of Natural History, but he was unable to secure a full-time position. And with Napoleon's downfall, even his small pension seemed threatened. When Scottish-American philanthropist and naturalist William McClure in 1815 offered Lesueur an opportunity to pursue scientific research in North America, all expenses paid for 2 years, Lesueur accepted. He wrote, "I so wanted to visit distant seas, to add more to our many observations. Crossing the ocean was an appealing lure." He continued, "I did not hesitate. In spite of the sorrow I felt at leaving the capital of France, all that was dear to my heart, my affections, my father, my friends at the Museum of Natural History." The two men, McClure and Lesueur, traveled to England, then to the Caribbean for fieldwork, and finally to Philadelphia. They continued to do fieldwork in North America, and Lesueur described an incident he observed locally that he linked to scientific communities. Responding to a letter from Cuvier in 1818 about disagreement among naturalists, Lesueur replied with a story of religious groups so divided that they cut their shared church in half. So this was around New Bedford. He wrote, "You speak to me of the dissension prevailing in the Philomatique Society, which gives me the opportunity of describing a happening here between two religious sects that are using the same church. Unable to live in agreement, they decided to divide the church in two. The structure, although rather large and built entirely of wood, was sawn in two through the middle of the door, and one half was placed on 2 wheels hauled by 24 pair of oxen to the other side of the city of New Bedford, through which this half of the church passed with great noise, accompanied by the people of the religious sect." So I find this interesting because Lesueur suggested a possible parallel between his community of scientific peers and the religious communities he encountered doing fieldwork, not unlike his experiences on the Baudin expedition. When he was not doing field work, Lesueur lived in Philadelphia from 1816 to 1825. There he gave art lessons in schools and to private pupils, and this is a drawing of Philadelphia from one of his pupils, a woman. It's either Virginia du Palais or Lucie Sister, both of whom went later with him to New Harmony. He worked as an engraver for the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia. He tended a small natural history shop, performed tasks for McClure, like shipping and receiving books and mineral samples from naturalists in Europe and North America, and tried as much as possible to do his own scientific work, notably to complete a work on North American fish. Lesueur was well integrated into the scientific community in Philadelphia, and he published several articles in the Journal of the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia. However, he depended on the assistance of fellow naturalists to publish his work in English. At the same time, he felt ignored by his colleagues in France, who published few of his reports from the US. And because he had to work in order to earn a living, he was unable to do the field work necessary for his scientific research. And he wrote, "My work forces me to be sedentary. I am not able to go about the country as I wish, to linger on shore and observe the marine life, to add to my drawings and increase my collections. My means will not permit me. All that I have done thus far is due to the liberality of Mr. McClure." Son of a gun. In the midst of this frustration, McClure once again provided Lesueur an opportunity to do field work by leaving Philadelphia for a utopian community in New Harmony, Indiana. New Harmony was the brainchild of British manufacturer and reformer Robert Owen. And unfortunately, I've got to keep moving along here. My claim is that Lesueur was mostly committed to going to New Harmony for the prospect of doing field work rather than for the experimental community. And initially, this hope for fieldwork opportunities seemed well-founded because just weeks after the group arrived in New Harmony, Lesueur and his friend, geologist Gerard Truce, started an expedition to lead mines in Missouri. Lesueur's visual and textual journals of the trip, like the accounts of the Baudin expedition, reveal the challenges of doing fieldwork in the wilderness and the men's observations of and adaptations to local culture. Traveling overland as well as by boat along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to reach Missouri, Lesueur, Truce, and a Dr. Culloch, here they are, encountered backwoodsmen, settlers, and slaves. After being dropped off in the dark on a tiny point of land from which they risked falling into the river and being carried off by the current, the three men formed a human chain to ascend the riverbank. Tramping through poorly marked trails, they confronted two armed men with rather hostile expressions who asked them if they had seen a man carrying a rifle. And Lesueur writes, "We held our ground. We responded without the least trace of being afraid of them, that we had seen no one, but I made sure they saw the double barrel of my rifle." The exchange then became more friendly. Well, he goes on about this. And he and Truce continued their trip to the lead mines. I do want to return to one point about his commentary on slavery. Lesueur wrote, "We were in a country of slaves. The blacks who served, and especially the mistress of the house who carried a large bunch of keys that she used often to open and close the many doors, show that she was the slave of her slaves. For the attention that she gave to locking up everything indicated clearly how unhappy it is to be served by beings that one always mistrusts." So again, I think the contrast with with Perron's account of slavery in Timor and his in Missouri is interesting. They published their work on the lead mines, which was all about the practicality of using the lead, not about this commentary. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up now. After the dissolution of the Owenite experiment in 1827, Lesueur remained in New Harmony, but scientific work increasingly became secondary to other tasks, including teaching, surveying, practicing medicine, painting scenery for the local theater, and transporting goods to New Orleans. Yet Lesueur found ways to do field work and transmit scientific knowledge and practice to a new generation of scientists in the absence of formal scientific communities. Long after his death, a former pupil and youngest son of Robert Owen, Richard Owen, a geologist, a professor, and first president of Purdue University, described Lesueur as very kind-hearted and a magnificent artist who taught young Owen how to draw and modeled scientific observation and collection. And now I'm going to have a last quote here. In the summer, he was fond of swimming in the Wabash River, and I frequently accompanied him. He instructed me how to feel with my feet for unios and other shells as we waded sometimes up to our necks in the river or ponds, searching to add to our collections. When he went fishing with others, he always exchanged his fine common fishes for the smallest and to them most indifferent looking specimens that he recognized. This item I have from Mr. Sampson, who is well acquainted with the fish of the Wabash, but who confesses he could see no difference in many caught until Mr. Lesueur, who at once detected the difference, had pointed it out. All right, this is the end. Lesueur actively participated in both American and European scientific communities through his work for the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, his travels with McClure, and participation in New Harmony, and his continued contacts with and sending of specimens to colleagues at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. Yet he never achieved the great stature through publication or comfortable remuneration for his scientific work. He would have been happy to join a French government expedition and generate more scientific knowledge in service to the French state, but his association with Napoleon through the Baudin expedition might have been an impediment to his advancement in the French scientific community during the Restoration, or perhaps geographical distance, along with the Museum of Natural History's initiative to support scientific travel to places other than North America, prevented French colleagues from responding more favorably to the collections Lesueur sent him, or to his efforts to publish in France and to win French support for scientific expeditions in North America. While American scientists showed high regard for Lesueur, including his artistic ability and his work on North American fish, his inability to write in English meant that he needed to collaborate with other naturalists, and this accounts in part for Lesueur's limited published output in the United States. As natural science and national interest increasingly allied in both France and the US, Lesueur contributed to that process, yet he found himself marginalized from it. Fieldwork made him a scientist, and it distanced him from the mechanisms of scientific reputation. Thank you.